achievement. Okay. So basically what I like to do today is in less than half an hour to share with you some thoughts, right? Then I think that the main task that we have today is our dialogue, our exchange, our conversation, the hour that we are supposed to be spending together after that, after I share a few thoughts. And those thoughts that I'd like to share are connected to why is it that we collect testimonies? And why is it that collecting women's testimonies is so important, right? The core of my thoughts is going to be focused on the mechanics, on how to collect testimonies in a way that is trauma-informed, that protects the women and that is victim-centered. And then if we have time, I like to share more visually a few examples about other contexts in which the women's participation when collecting testimonies aiming towards justice, reparations, and non-repetition has proven to be crucial, right? And those are processes that are still going, of course. But I like to start by saying that collecting testimonies is just a core tool in transitional justice mechanisms. And what do we mean by that? What we mean by that is that when people experience different types of violences with S, because usually when in wars, people suffer from different violences, those people have different ideas of justices with an S as well. Some people might want more of a judicial justice. Some other people might want more of a restorative justice. This is not so judicial, but they still want truths and they still want to face perpetrators and ask them questions or get something from them. And some other people might just want to recover the bodies of their loved ones. So many different options, right? The important thing for us is to become aware of the different needs of the people and to provide with the right of having the opportunity to listen to their needs for justice. And previous to that are those stories of suffering and pain and violence. Of course, the precondition to listen to people is safety. And this is as basic as life. It's very difficult to listen to people when the bombs are still falling, when people are still killed, or when people are still in jail and everybody's fearing for their loved ones. And even so, we try to do our best when collecting testimonies, as we know. But being realistic, physical safety and emotional safety should be one of the preconditions before we collect testimonies, right? I think I'm just going to start with how we talk to people in general. Of course, there's no way I can avoid the feminist perspective, focusing on women, right? But I'm going to try to put on my psychologist and sociologist hat in order to share with you some of the more recent, well-structured advice about the do's and don'ts for collecting testimonies, okay? So let me jump into that. This is part of a training that is for free, and I will share with you the link that you can have access to at the end. The training is quite long, so I did my best to make an abstract of it here, okay? The trauma-informed interviewing follows what is called the PEACE steps method, okay? And this acronym responds to the following capital letters: P for plan, prepare; E for engage and explain; A, which is the central and core part for action, accounts, the real listening, right? The stories; C for the closing; and E for the evaluation. And again, we need to always underline the need to protect and to be very centered in the person we are listening at, and to give that person as much control as possible. That's the main difference with an interrogation that unfortunately is universally the understanding from a more legal perspective of an account. In the first step, the plan and prepare, basically what we do is we need to be very clear about what is it that we want. Why is it that we are listening to the person, okay? It's also very important to know who that person is. Not only the name, but also the bits and pieces of the background that are essential. And for women, we know that many of our gender roles are very much connected to caring. Who are the people we spend our lives with? Who are the people we care about? What are the duties that are invisible that we are daily involved in? Those things mark some of the significant differences with men. Men tend to define themselves by their jobs. Even if we are hardworking, visibly women, we still have many other jobs that are so invisible. So that's part of the backgrounds we need to consider there, okay? It's also very important to be very down to earth and think in terms of how does the person make it to the place where we are holding our meeting, okay? Is it a long trip? Do they have to pay for it? Are we going to reimburse them? Do we have some food and water when they arrive? Are they going to be emotionally broken? Do we have something in mind to do if that's the case? And have more or less a route of the interview. How are things going to go? This is why the PEACE method helps, because it's very basic regarding the logistical order, right? The last one is very much connected to our own psychological readiness, in the sense of, how do I feel today? Do I think I'm strong and prepared to listen to very painful stories? Do I feel ready to content the suffering of the person and the story? Am I going to try to accompany the person, or do I feel more like, maybe it's not the right day for me to listen to all these things? And we need to be very honest with ourselves regarding that, right? So to be a bit more specific about this first step, the plan and preparation, it's very helpful if we are very clear about those objectives and if we've done our homework regarding the knowledge of who is the person. It's also very helpful if it's doable, because this is not the case. I'm thinking about Gaza or the West Bank right now, to have a mapping of the potential referrals for what happens after the testimony collection. Imagine that we have a mother of 3 kids. Those kids have different material needs. They need food, they need diapers. In the family, they also have elderly people with mental health needs. And the woman also needs support regarding her home caring tasks. It's wonderful if we can provide with some referrals there. Basic social work organizations, voluntary professionals, whatever. But as we said, they are not always there, okay? So even if they are not always there, we need to be very realistic about how is it that we can support the person. Because that person is giving us the honor of sharing her story with us. So it's great when we have something to give back in order to avoid making it an extractive experience. The map referrals work really well in settings where those referrals are in place. And if that's the case, it's very important that we do those mappings and we keep the network with those other professionals. The role of the interpreters is crucial here. I can tell you that many migrants in Greece speaking Arabic have told us that they greatly benefited from translations from Spanish to Arabic. Because we are all very smart. When we are needy, and we can extract the things that we need if, of course, we can understand the language. So the role of interpreters and cultural mediators is crucial. Let's not forget that. And again, Mia and Julia, thank you very much for your work in this session. In the don'ts, try to avoid that, I would say, naughty thought that we have many times, like, oh, I know this person. I know the profile. I know the profile of a family woman who also has to take care of the elderly. Okay? Even if that comes to mind, just put it aside, push it away, and try to listen from anew. Allow yourself to really listen and be surprised by all the things that that woman's experience can teach us, right? Also, try to avoid interviewing people that have already been interviewed with the same objectives for another organization. If the objectives are different, that's wonderful. But if people were blunt enough and open enough, people tend to be very nice most of the time, right? If they were not as nice, many of them will tell us, why are you asking the same questions all over again? Right? So try to avoid those type of repetitions. Try to avoid the interrogations. Listen in the most open way. And again, we've talked about our own psychological state there. Try to remain strong, or at least be able to contain yourself when trying to accompany the other person. How are you doing? Are we doing okay up to here? Yes? Great.
Yes, thank you.
Let's switch then to the second step of the peace method, right? The explanation, the engagement. It's mostly a conversation. We are going to be deepening in the objectives of the interview, and we want to establish kind of a good relationship, a trusting one, okay? A more horizontal one. It's not like we are the experts that are going to take your testimony to the International Criminal Court, okay? Nothing like that. Should be much more horizontal than that, managing expectations, and really trying to also put some parts, important parts of ourselves out there. Set out the ground rules for the interview. We'll be talking about that. And it's very important, in order to warranty confidentiality, to explain what is it that we're going to do with that information. What's the use that we're going to give to that information, okay? And allow the person to be in control, telling her, we can stop at any time. You let me know if you don't feel comfortable with some of the topics. And I understand that some of the topics are more difficult for you than others, but you're in charge now. So just let me know how is it that I can help that trip that we are taking together. In a more detailed way, here you have some of the do's and don'ts for this engagement and explanation phase, okay? Let me share with you one of my Black examples. I've made so many mistakes in my life, and at my age, I keep on making them. But I remember this one when I had to interview a group of women from the Sahara Desert. And I arrived late. And I was even more stressed because I was even more scared of arriving even later. And when I arrived, they put together for me a wonderful meal of lamb. And you know what? I don't eat lamb. And when I saw those amounts of cooked lamb there, I got even more stressed out. So I just jumped into throwing out the topics. And after 20 minutes or so, one of them was like, well, I think you will understand this because you're a journalist, right? And I was like, oh my goodness. I did such a bad job introducing myself that they think I'm a journalist. So the way they were engaging me and the way they were defining the relationship was totally different from what I wanted it to be, from what I expected, right? And it was just because I was too stressed out in order to introduce myself properly, okay? I ended up eating the lamb, and I ended up trying to clarify all the different misunderstandings. Anyway, it's very important to focus on the privacy and the confidentiality. One thing that usually helps is the sorority here, and the fact that we women tend to understand each other or to share things, but not everything, of course. So defining how is it that we are going to keep on protecting that person from being exposed, it's always very, very important. In many cases, we do have formal documents for the informed consent. And we need to be very clear about how we explain that and how the other person understands those. Informed consent, at the end of the day, it's a power tool. Okay, let's face it. And it can be very Western, and it can be very academic. So it's our task to put it in the most realistic terms so that the other person really grasps what they think it's useful from the informed consent. It's also very important to have the engagement and the commitment of the interpreter, right? We know what a difference it makes when we have very good interpreters that sometimes are much better professionals than ourselves. It has happened to me several times, and I have to say that they should get all the credit. Huh? And then think about the recording. Some people feel very comfortable having a recorder in front of them. It's like invisible to them. Some people totally distrust it. And we might feel they are a bit paranoid or not, but it's not what we feel about how they feel about it. The core thing is how they feel about it. So it's for them to decide how is it that they want us to record the information they are sharing, okay? Try to avoid very formal language, okay? And try to avoid closed questions. Just try to throw topics in the most gentle way, because we all tend to feel tested, like at a university test, right? When people ask us questions. So it's very different to ask someone, do you remember? Than to ask them, can you remember? And still, if you ask me, can you remember? I personally still feel tested, like they are trying how good my memory is. To say smells, sensations, what stayed with you? Different tones, right? Very different tones, and only a few words make the difference there. Seriously. So we need to be very careful to continue learning and very gentle about communication in that regard. I'm going to move forward because I want to make sure that I don't take too much of your time. And we've already made it to the center of the method, right? Is the the action, the accounts, the real interviews there. And still, I have very good lawyer friends who are very psycholegally oriented that use the term interrogations. But I understand that the way of understanding this term is different from other lawyers, right? In the accounts, what we want to do is we want to get story. The person is sharing with us a narrative story. Sometimes we need to provide with some hints in order for the person to go back to the story, because the majority of us make lots of curves and rounds when narrating stories. And the majority of us tend to forget some of the parts of the narration. So we need to go back and forth. That is normal, okay? Because memory is not a video recording. Memory is more of a puzzle. So we go back and forth. The personal memories that we are interested in when talking to victims of different types of violence are very much based on difficult sensations and feelings, which makes the puzzle even more difficult for us to put together, okay? Do not challenge the person. Sometimes with very good will, but very bad judgment, we go by like, oh, I thought you said that the car of the soldiers was white. The person might feel like they've been challenged. There are different ways of trying to underline things that are not very clear. Like, can you please retell that story to me? Because I thought I was paying attention, but I think I missed some details, right? Here, it's very important to allow the person to decide on how to start. Some people rather start at the end of the story. Some people rather start at the very beginning. Some people rather start right in the middle. So that's okay. Let them start where they feel more comfortable and try to accompany them, trying to help them to fill the gaps of that long narrative or road there. Try to open the topics with these open questions that give them the opportunity of continue with the story. And again, be very sensitive about this idea that trauma is basically frozen in our brains through our basic feelings. What we saw, what we heard, what we touched, what we smelled. So this is why trying to connect to the narration of the person in terms of those very basic feelings is very important. I found it very useful in very different cultures. The active listening skills is something that as a student, I learned initially being trained as a clinical psychologist, and they taught us the posture the physical corporal position in order to listen. And even now, I feel it was maybe a bit too Western or a bit too rigid, you know? So it also has to do with the culture. You don't always have to have both feet on the ground. You don't always have to have your palms up. You don't always have to look at the person straight forward because they might feel it's too inquisitive. So try to adapt to the situation, right? But once we really engage into listening, our body is very telling. So some people tilt their heads. Some people feel more comfortable when sitting on the ground. In some still ongoing violent situations, we need to find the very right location or setting. So it's for you to decide how to put your listening into its active mode, starting by choosing the place. Now, we have some hints here. When we talk about the TED, it's basically the open questions. It's like, please tell me more. Please, can you explain more? Or can you describe better that thing that you just said? Because I find it fascinating. I think it's so meaningful, right? So it's the TED, the tell, explain, describe. And then we can always use the WH questions. Who, when, why, how, but again, always under pretty much the framework of I'm still trying to understand better. That's pretty much the attitude there. And again, accept that some people will not be able to fulfill our expectations because they are not us. And because even if we are hoping for a testimony that could be a top perpetrator to a top domestic or international court, that might not be the case. And still, even if that's not the case, they are honoring us with their experience, and we are getting lots of very, very important information there. The don'ts here is to not take away the control from the person. If we see that the person is struggling with part of the stories, like maybe now you want to stop. It's up to you to decide. Up to you to decide. And again, crazy thoughts might come into our minds like, I think that this person is broken down really badly now and we have to stop. Maybe the person doesn't want to stop and we need to respect that. Okay? Then if we start getting very clear signs that that person is trembling or really dissociating or there are limits, right? But if we feel like the person is struggling and she decides to continue, let her continue for a while. And we'll keep on monitoring how that goes. Because each one of us has different ways and rhythms when dealing with very strong emotions. Try to avoid interrupting the person. Only yesterday in Spain, we had a very public trial of an attempted rape from a top politician, and the judge in a public video gave us the best example of what not to do. He kept on interrupting only the woman, not the man, right? During the trial. He interrupted her more than 30 times in 4 minutes. Can you imagine how she felt in that regard? And again, try to avoid pushing the person to relive experiences that he or she is not fully narrating in her story. And in that regard, we had the experience of seeing some very dangerous practices while collecting testimonies. Let me give you an example. There are people in Guatemala that have been trained in what we call these methods under the psychodrama approach. The basic idea here is that when you relive very painful experiences, that gives yourself the opportunity of processing them in a different way. So you can work through that, right? But that can be done when you are fully accompanied by someone that has experience and by someone that really has the knowledge of the tools and the possibility of monitoring you afterwards. So It's not for us during the collection of a testimony to bring the person back to the most painful moments unless the person has decided herself to share those with us. Yeah. And I know it might sound commonsensical, but again, many times with very good will, we make that mistake. And one, it's very clear for all of us women. Try to avoid questions that might imply blame. That one is very obvious. But again, let me share with you, and please forgive me for using my own examples, because those are the ones that I know best. Only recently, I made a very young professional feel awful, awful. And it took me a few seconds to realize, right? We were talking about one patient, and she was sharing with me, and that wonderful old woman, you know, in detention, I mean, she taught me so much. And she was sharing her stories with me of how much she learned from this old migrant woman, who was in detention in the Balkans. So I asked the young psychologist, did you stay in touch with her? It was like kind of an impulse for me, you know? And she was like, no, maybe I should have. And I felt awful again, because with very good will, I wanted more of the story and I wanted to be supported with my young colleague, right? What I got was making her feel guilty. So becoming very aware of these things helps us to become better in our next interview or our next thing, right? We are close to the end now. How am I doing on time? I think I'm doing okay. The C at the peace method is for the closing. Here, basically, we want to make sure that we are on the same page, that what we heard really matches what the person intended to share with us, okay? Here we go back again to the need to have a map for referrals, if that's possible, and if it's not, at least to be there, to try to be there for her. This is why, let me go back to the very first step, the preparation. It's very important when we introduce ourselves at the beginning of the interaction to tell the person that there's always the possibility to stay in touch. Because many people do recall lots of details after the interview is done. Okay? There's something that is called reverse anthropology that is very much in fashion now when collecting some testimonies. And it's basically this idea of sharing the whole testimony that we've collected with the person. If the person is allowed to read the testimony, that's fine. If not, we can share the audio, or if not, we can have just another even longer meeting in order to share what we heard with the person. In some cases, people will tell you, that's fine, thank you so much. I feel like you really listened to me. In some cases, people will make corrections and suggestions. And I've run into cases in which the person got back to me 7 times asking to make changes. And of course, I mean, that might be a bit too much, but we all have different personalities and different challenges, right? So when we share what we've listened at with the person, we need to become aware that some people might react in different ways. But it's important for us at least to give back to them the core understanding of what we got from their narrative. In that closing, it's also very important to tell them, okay, we just have a few more minutes. Probably you will have more things that you will like to share or not. Still, we can keep in touch. Again, this brings me back to the preparation, first phase of the interview. It's important to tell the person, we have this much time for the interview. If it becomes too short, hopefully we'll try to find more time afterwards. But we all know how much in control we feel when we know that when we go to the gynecologist or to the doctor or to have a coffee with a friend, is going to last around this long, right? I mean, the uncertainty of not knowing how much time something is going to take is usually more negative than positive into the interaction. So being very clear about the timing at the beginning and at the end, it's very important. Also, let them ask any questions that they might have. Sometimes the questions might be very much connected to their needs. You were talking about how difficult these last 2 days after the formal ceasefire have been in the West Bank. And when we work with migrants that are right at the borders of the 4 hot zones in Europe, in some cases, they just want to talk to us because they have needs, then they expect that we can fulfill some of those needs: diapers, food, medical assistance. So it's very important that we listen to those, even though that might not be very much connected to the goals of our interaction there. Huh? Yeah. The don'ts have to do with not managing that very last piece of time in the right way, or they have to do with confrontation. Sometimes the person has a personality that brings out the worst of us, and we become confrontative. That can happen, you know? So try to avoid that. We need to acknowledge that we were not able to establish the best rapport with that person, but still try to avoid confrontation there. Or even give the person to have another meeting with a different person that is not ourselves, you know? I mean, that's real. It's humble and it's real. So yeah. Insist that that person can get back in touch with us or someone else from our organization. That is important. That helps us to avoid extractivism when collecting testimonies, and that also helps the person to get the feeling that what they've done is worthy and it's important. In the evaluation, there are two main corners or sides to it. First of all, we evaluate how the person did regarding our objectives. You see, I just phrased it the wrong way. How our objectives were regarding the person's narrative. I think that's a bit better. Huh? But then we also need to evaluate how we did ourselves as interviewers. And in this regard, it's important, first of all, that we go back to the very basic objectives of our work. And we need to be very clear that interviewing is a never-ending process. I've seen very good truth commissioners from different truth commissions making mistakes when interviewing people, you know? And we all do. So we all need to keep on learning. And also we need to ask ourselves, what is it that went well? What is it that I can improve? If I need some support improving here or there, where can I get that support? Whom is it that I can talk to? Because we also have our own well-being needs and our own learning professional needs, right? And in the don'ts, obviously, as in a mirror, you can see the opposites. Don't assume that interviews are perfect. We can always improve. And try to do that evaluation with the interpreter or with some other colleagues. Even if the other colleagues have not been present there, try to find at least a few minutes to share how you felt about that interview with other colleagues. That might seem very minor, but it's always important. And this is the source. This is the long training. It's around 6 hours if you are very focused. And it's a great training, seriously. We've learned a lot from that. We are trying to adapt it to different settings and different cultures now. It's quite recent. It's been developed by the Office of Human Rights for Migration at the European Union, ODIHR. Of course, there are many things that we are aware of when we collect testimonies from women. And I love the way you put it, Nida, when you said there's no way we can avoid that feminist approach, right? Most of the time when we talk to women, women tend to put other people in their narrative first. That's very obvious when you deal with asylum claims. And I've seen lots of asylum claims being rejected because the lawyer said there's no fear, there's no own fear here. You were not persecuted. It's very obvious that many family members were persecuted, but it's not clear for yourself. Because many women tend to narrate the stories of suffering of their family members. We've been raised to be caregivers. we've been raised to be very protective, and that can usually put us even more at risk. We also get to do lots of work with human rights defenders in Central America now, and that's still the case. I would dare to say that's one of the very universal traits. Women put themselves last. And that is very important to keep in mind when we listen to their narratives and their stories. And that can be telling very small details, but yeah. How are you doing?
Great, thank you. Just wanted, before I go to the questions, I wanted, if you can, in a few minutes, just maybe zoom out for us and say something about the way that collecting the testimonies affects the women, and or you can focus on whatever on the other side, on the on creating a change, on public discourse, on negotiators. If you can bring a few examples, and then we'll open it for discussion, so prepare your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let me share with you a few slides. Is that okay? We still have like 5 minutes, yeah?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I have a few examples here. The first of them is the Women's Court in the Balkans. It took place 20 years after the ceasefire in the Balkans, and basically brought together women that didn't have the opportunity of giving their testimonies at the court at The Hague. Of course, the women giving the testimonies at the court at The Hague were very specific profiles, and they followed a very specific psycho-legal international path. Most of the women in Bosnia did not have that opportunity. And 20 years later, they still felt the need for justice. So what they did is they put together what is called a non-judicial feminist justice system, okay? And they call it the Women's Court. There's documentation up there. They spent 3 years preparing women to share their testimonies with other women. They did it in small groups, in rural areas and in urban areas. And then they had a huge event in Sarajevo, women from 6 different new countries, but they went back to the old capital somehow. And during 3 days in stage, they shared their testimonies in different languages in a very protective environment. They put together the testimonies. Academics were there trying to shape their testimonies also in theoretical frameworks. And they put out together publications that were trying to influence different governments, okay? Another very good example is the example of Colombia. What happened in Colombia much before the ceasefire and of course before the Truth Commission is that there was, let me try to recover this here. There was a large women's organizations that is called Ruta Pacífica, the Pacific Route of Women, mostly bringing together rural women from different regions. Colombia is a huge country. Geographically, it's very, very big, right? So they worked very endogenously in the regions, but then they were connected through the women that had the privilege to travel. And they put together their testimonies collection that went on for over a year and a half here. They collected over 1,000 testimonies in Spanish. That publication was key to convince people during the ceasefire to have a specific women's section for the Truth Commission. And then what we did was to translate that to English and to share it with groups of migrant women in Athens during the wrongly called crisis of refugees in 2015, okay? And then we became aware that some of those women, mostly from Syria, were demanding the same translation as I told you in Arabic, and we did it. And I think I share it with you, right, Nida? So in this case, in the case of Colombia, it ended up having a huge impact on the Truth Commission. And the recommendations of the Truth Commission in gender have been taken into account by the current government in Colombia, the Petro. So public policies directly there in a process of, I would dare to say, 9 years, which is a very positive example. And in some other cases, like the migrants women or the women from Syria, it's still to be seen. It's very long. It might end up not having a real impact on regulations or policies, but that's not a reason for us not to continue trying. We have some other examples, like the Permanent People's Tribunal for Migrant Women, and we are trying to encourage those now with women in Central America. Yeah. Another very important thing that usually emerges in the middle of these long processes is the mutual support groups of women. Mm-hmm. Just by getting together, women feel that their truth is acknowledged, that they have more things to share, that their testimonies are valued. They find things in common that they want to nurture. And some of them come up with business ideas. Some others come up with artistic initiatives in order to sell things or just to make exhibitions. The younger generations put up together map sounds, songs, paintings, whatever. So whatever comes out of that mutual support that women experience while sharing their testimonies and getting together is also very invisible, but wow, it's very rich.
Wow, thank you so much, Arantxa. I have many questions, but I want to open it for discussion. Thank you so much. I have my own questions, but if anyone else, thank you.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening and for giving me this opportunity. I really have so much respect for your work, and it's an honor for me to be